So thank you everyone for joining us, and this is our second in a series of talks for this year's Open House Festival, where we've been chatting to some of the UK's leading architects and makers. If you missed out on our first one, we spoke with Gundry and Ducker, but if you missed that, don't worry, we're going to be releasing all of these videos up on our YouTube channel over the next coming weeks, and that includes some of the others that we've got coming up as well. Before we get started tonight, just a brief introduction if you didn't tune in last time. My name's Dean, and I'm joined by my colleague Christopher. Give us a wave, Chris.
Hello.
And together we are the team behind We Design Homes. We launched We Design Homes just over a year ago, and since then we've been doing our best to help homeowners, enthusiastic homeowners should I say, connect with some of the best architects from across the UK and Ireland. So if you're one of those people that are looking for an architect and you don't know where to start, whether it's refurbishing your house or extending or even building a new home, just get in touch with us and we'll see how we can help you.
Thanks very much, Dean. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our guests today. Welcome to Margaret and Johan, founders of London-based architecture and design studio Archmongers. They are a practice renowned for specialising in the sensitive refurbishment of mid-century homes in particular, and we particularly love their use of beautiful hard-wearing and timeless materials to create functional yet playful homes. So welcome to Margaret and Johan. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Hi guys.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, yeah, that's the cue. Sorry. And then should we will share our screen if that's okay.
You can share your screen, yeah. Again, if anyone tuned in late, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A section down the bottom, and me and Christopher will weave those in and out of the conversation or save them for the end.
Yeah.
Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So is that all working? Can you see?
We can see beautifully.
Great.
Fantastic.
Sure. I'll let you introduce us. Is that
Okay.
nice?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
put you on the spot.
Yeah, so we're Archmongers Architects. We have been going for 9 years now. We're a very small practice, and this is Johan, and I'm Margaret, and we met at university and have worked together kind of ever since. It sort of organically started the practice really from there. And we work on a range of different projects, but mainly residential, and we'll talk you through some of those now. So just show you a few examples and also commercial projects.
Awesome.
So these are, a few of our most recent projects, I guess. We've got a new build house at the moment that we're designing in Broadstairs, which is very exciting and really nice to be out of London. And then some of our projects for mid-century houses, you can see in the middle there, transforming even the kind of most historically disregarded typologies. We really enjoy working with those. And then also Victorian houses. There's a project which we'll talk about later, which is the tiled one there. And newer kind of 70s and 80s houses on that side. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, if you guys are seeing it, it would be the same way, wouldn't it? The projection are our small commercial. So shop fit-outs and office fit-outs. And that's something we really enjoy, the contrast between the two, because it's nice having, very different briefs and clients and needs in that way.
Are there things you learn in one typology that you take to another typology, going backwards and forwards, or are they fairly distinct in that way?
I think our sort of love of the home definitely comes into whenever we've done an office space. I think we sort of try. Yeah, it's true. Actually, there's a sort of a sense of homeliness and a scale that definitely reminds you of being sort of protected by this interior in some ways. Like it's kind of comfy. That one down at the bottom, Norwegian media company, has definitely got this feeling of different ways of using that space, not just at your desk, but like there's a sort of like.
And there's a zoom into the scale, isn't
there?
So it's about the lighting and the plants and areas of sort of tactile materials that you often don't get in commercial environments, and often they're budget or they're not quite as hard. You need something a bit more hard wearing, but it's nice to have those moments which will make you enjoy, occupying that space. So,
Yeah, especially now more than ever.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? Yeah, and then I guess also with the retail side, you can often test things, which you've got an example of it later on, but you can sort of test things that are slightly less conventional, and then because quite often the companies are up for it, and then actually that gets transferred back into the residential scale, which is nice in some ways. It goes back.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There's a direct example of that green concrete table you can see up at the top right, and that will translate into the project later.
There's also something really nice about commercial where things get decided a lot faster.
Yeah.
And that can be very nice to make fast, intuitive decisions,
Yeah.
and then take that into residential can be really a great advantage as well.
That is true, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
But that Chris's question leads very beautifully into the next section, which is about quite often when we design these things, I guess we take images of our places or the things we design quite soon after, and I guess we have often thought about going.
You mean the photographer, the professional
it's like we have often thought about what it would be like if you come back 15 years later and re-photograph the same project, because quite often we sort of we design the spaces to have this feeling of home in them very sort of directly, like they're made to take whatever interior you put into them. And I guess this series of photos are much more about the stuff we normally don't show, which is the little moments that happen when you turn on the light at night in the corner, or that kind of feeling of something behind this walk-in wardrobe, or that just
should just get better, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it gets better over time.
Hope it would mature like a good kind of wine, or the materials should wear and patinate, and the way it's occupied. Yeah, it's true. It'd be nice to go back with some of them, and the gardens would start to mature, and but we definitely think about that when we design, don't we?
Yeah, so there's like quite often it's the internal glimpses into the other spaces that you kind of, when we start a project, we quite often ask the clients whether we can stay in their house alone for like along maybe half a day or something like that to sort of take it in, and occasionally it's the same thing afterwards that you wish you can kind of walk around and learn from what happened. You kind of program it, but there's always something that is unexpected, like you turn on the light and you see the bedroom behind it, not in an abstract way, but just this feeling of space behind like glimpses basically internally is something that we really love. And so that is quite important when we design, I think, to sort of make sure that the interiors can take, it's not exterior and interior, it's definitely one thing for us. And quite often we actually help the clients as well with the furniture as well. It's something that we deeply love. And find quite important if there's budget for it, obviously.
It's nice to do the whole thing. So this is our office. That's the room that we're sitting in at the moment with our shelves. So we have lots and lots of samples in the office, and we do like to make models as much as we can. Obviously, that is time and budget allowing often, unfortunately, but as much as we can get kind of tactile, and we always will show samples of materials so that the clients can feel what it's going to be like in their hands. And again, the design process, try and do as much kind of, as well as being on the computer, which is inevitable, as much hand drawing and sketching and working things out. And often actually it's a faster method, and it is a lot more productive. And then in the top right, something that we came from studying our masters together, and we really enjoyed making stuff in the workshop. And that's not something that you often have time for either, but it's nice to every now and then kind of try and make something. And our kind of dream or aim, and it hasn't always been fulfilled, is to make one thing in each project and actually be able to give it to the client.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often, but in this case we did actually manage to make a door handle.
When we got this office, we were so excited. We filled this room full of like nice machines, and then it's like surprisingly little that we use them. But occasionally you can sort of go in and just make a door handle in this case, right, for the client, which is quite nice. Or like just a bit of just fooling around with a bit of wood. It's quite nice to have that.
You never quite know it's going to come. Yeah.
Is that just to give you an opportunity to kind of just get a bit hands-on with it, even if even if the client doesn't want it?
It's they're like that is.
They haven't not wanted it.
They're like, that is truly awful. But and then they sort of, whenever we come and visit, they reinstall the handle.
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? I think so. Now we're going into just showing because I guess your talks are about a journey, and I was talking to Dean and Chris before, and quite often some of the houses that we're doing are already quite nice. So it's like you're just making it even better, I guess, right? That we're quite fortunate to have some lovely houses in London that we're dealing with. But I think as an example, I still think, although Stego is a few years back now, it's still the project where the change was the most dramatic. Yeah, and also where we were so impressed with the client sort of buying this place, really believing that this could be so much nicer, because it really, I think most people look at that house and not want it. But it's a house in Zone 1, so it's a really good location, but it's this kind of you know, lots of 60s and 70s houses plotted around this whole area, quite a lot of ex-council. And this was a corner plot. This photograph is taken from one of the estates opposite. And I guess the photos that we don't normally show is this one, because that is, I often, you know, when you see these TV programs, you kind of put a gray filter on the but that's not actually the case here. It was pretty bad.
But just so much potential. And
yeah,
I think that was a great thing. The client came to us, having seen the potential in this house, but also was just fantastic to work with, and she really did trust our ideas, and her input into that was really good collaboration. And the fact that, you know, it's got the right bones already. Yeah. It's an end of terrace. There's little things like that which absolutely transformed what you could do with that project.
Yeah. Did she have a bit of a design sensibility already? Was she sort of thoughtful? I mean, obviously she's got a good eye, and you know,
she was one of those. She came. I think she's creative. Yeah, and also she's very. If she finds people that she trusts, she really does actually. That she really trusted us, because I guess for us, she'd been turned down by a lot of other practices, saying that. I mean, it was clear that they just weren't interested in this plot, because it wasn't very desirable as a project. But then I think for us, it was a really interesting challenge to sort of, we could see something there, but also just a really interesting challenge of taking what seemingly is sort of one of the worst typologies and trying to turn it into something that has a bit of magic to it, a bit of merit. Like there are a few things that were quite nicely, like one, as Max was saying, is that it is an end of terrace. The other thing is that it was walled, and that there was an existing garage here at the end, which you can see from the garden. And then the third thing is all these like little poking out. That was actually an enclosed porch already, right? So planning wise, there were a lot of clues here where you could say, well, you know, there is already an existing, we just want to turn that into a dwelling and connect to the house. And there are already examples of these little porches that sort of sticks out. So it's like there's already clues of I guess extensions, right?
And then very little in the context which you could kind of offend. The context was a mishmash of all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
So that's a great advantage as well. So with this one, we started as usual. I think there was a rougher model before this, and then this is kind of the model that we presented to the client. And that's actually more of a theoretical drawing that we sort of did afterwards, but it shows you kind of the axo view.
Yeah, essentially, this is the existing house, and that's the footprint of the garage. And what we did was to rebuild that garage and sink it further into the ground to create a dwelling, and then connect it up with this garden extension, essentially making the garden smaller, but then connecting all of these spaces up to the garden. There's a bedroom here, a kitchen with these sort of roof lights, and then that is a tiny little study, which, funny enough, this was before COVID, and now is obviously quite an asset to have a little studio space.
Small room, huge window.
It's small, like tiny room, but like a massive window. And then on the other side, there is the porch that's been replaced with this sort of, it's corrugated aluminium that then links up with the rest of the facades. The other thing was to stain, it's not a paint, but it's staining the bricks. So because when we were extending this to go up and down, obviously the existing brickwork would suffer. But then by staining it, you can still see the traces of the original, but kind of dulled down. So it separates that corner completely and ties it all together. But she really loved it, and I think actually, to be fair, it's not changed at all except for that window that's slightly more that was a better decision to sort of push it further towards the wall side.
Where did the ideas of the kind of the staggered kind of roof line come from?
It was mainly to bring in light, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it? Is just to get light into that space?
Yeah, getting the maximum light as possible. Because of the kind of enclosure of that plan, you could only really face into a courtyard which already had a wall up. So we needed to bring that in some way.
But and then there's I guess there's also the elevation here. All of these little extensions on the house kind of they marry together with the it's like that looks more holistic when it's when they're everywhere, right? On every facade there's an element of that kind of. And then it's called Stego because it was like Jo sat in the garden quite a lot and people couldn't see her, but she could hear people's conversations. And there was a kid when it was being built that said it looked like a Stegosaurus. That was it.
That's great.
That's how deep, intellectual, and meaningful the name is.
Nice. I like it. At least it's got a story.
So these are kind of construction drawings. Just so it's obviously a journey to go to these planning drawings. So much more straightforward layout sort of drawings, and then you go through specifying everything. And we do really enjoy specifying every little thing down to kind of the toilet roll holder. So this is the sort of the set of drawings with all the measurements and layouts and everything that the builder would get, and also for building control, just to sort of show you the.
Yeah, and
that's a small amount, small
exactly.
snippets of them. There'll be a kind of bunch of 20 to 30 drawings for construction.
Plus, it's also, I guess, we are probably being a bit slow. It's also to control that detail level on such a small scale. It does require quite a lot of thinking about these corners and joints. So there's a lot to work out, both in drawings and on site, I guess.
A few photos from site, so you can sort of see, when the garage is first completely taken out, and then the garage was starting to come up. No, I mean, it's fine. Yeah, and then there's the first structure of the timber roof.
That was a nice day on site, wasn't it? Seeing the things coming out.
So she already had quite a lot of space, didn't she, for a zone 1 property? It
enlarged it hugely. Yeah.
It was pretty much twice the. It added like 50 square meters onto this property, which wasn't it was quite a small house anyway. But the dog Finn, who was throughout the process, was always on site. It was quite lovely, actually, wasn't it? Somehow, yeah.
Didn't like the main contractor though.
No, hated the main. He's
a really nice guy.
Really nice.
I like his smells.
Hated him.
Yeah.
These are the photos that you kind of normally see. But so you can see although the garden is quite small, it's very much, these doors can slide to the side, and then it's very much one space with the kitchen. And that's the new entrance. And then that's the, from that other side, looking at the garage. You can see, we really like the fact you can still see the trace of the old wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't want to paint that, first of all, because paint flakes off after a while, right? But it was nice to see the traces of the old house. So we left it as a stain.
What a difference a bit of stain makes, though.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And it doesn't, you almost have to do it because it needs to marry up with this whole corner.
But also, they weren't very nice bricks.
No, they
were. It's a great reason to use it, but it also just hides slightly shit bricks, which it can be quite a good budget thing as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Hang man. This is like straight. I'm almost going down. But this is a few interior shots, and then what we really wanted to get to was this across the courtyard are 2 desks. That was that funny space that we were talking about, the little thing that pokes out, and the 2 desks are. So you can work here or in the bedroom, and it's on different levels. So in here, you're level with the garden, and in here you can then look down onto this other studio and connect into the courtyard. And it really worked well, that part. I think.
We did kind of squeeze out everything we could.
Yeah. Highly detailed, but then it was sort of worth it, I think. That's it. That's before and after.
Nice. It's amazing, isn't
it? It's such a refreshing project to see. I know that you guys also do a bit of work in sort of the Victorian era, but projects like these, to see people with that kind of ambition for a house that's pretty predisposing when you look at it on the left there. I think it takes a bit of a leap of imagination, doesn't it? But I guess as Victorian houses get further and further away from working Londoners, that this kind of showing people that this is possible with a 60s, 70s, 80s house, is actually really encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think
the values. Sorry.
No, good.
Yeah, so much better value, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what you can do with it can also be much more transformative.
I think there's also this thing where, like, on one side, it's kind of an insignificant house anyway, so it doesn't feel so bad really going for it. You know, it's not like
it can't get any worse.
Yeah, there's nothing to respect in some ways, which is quite refreshing. And at the same time, you don't have to take everything down, like you don't have to rebuild everything. So it's fine.
Yeah.
So sustainably, that helps a bit. But then the other thing is that has become, well, I was telling you the other day, it's become like I guess like almost like a social meeting point for this area. Like, so like Joe would quite often, as well as listening to kids calling it a stegosaurus, he would also like hear people say, well, let's meet. I'm at the zigzag house, or and everyone know it, right? It's like that's kind of quite nice. Quite often, when it goes published, people would be like, oh, you're the, people know it, which I think is quite nice that it suddenly adds some sort of significance as a marker, a little bit like when you're walking in central London and you're looking for the BT Tower. There's something, not that it has any, but like it has that kind of feeling of being recognizable, which is nice.
Yeah, it's nice people are also investing into this housing stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a good feeling.
How's the planning process with this house? Were the planners pretty on board, or was there a bit of nervousness?
It was a funny, I mean, you're always slightly worried talking about planning because it seems so project to project and council to council and whoever you get as the commit. There's always, in this case, it was interesting because we had quite an enthusiastic planning case officer, who was actually really liked it, but he also expressed that the committee, not everyone in the committee was on board. There was concern, right? So the first thing, and I think it always feels with the planning that there's a level which you can never really get to. Like the committee always seems to be like a slightly out of reach thing, right? Yeah.
You're not given that opportunity to kind of reason with them or convince them why.
In this case, in the first case, it came back and he was like, he actually came back to us before the decision was made, which isn't a thing anymore, right? But he said, like, look, the committee won't approve it. It has to fit more with the existing surroundings, the context. And I think we were sort of arguing that the context, I mean, wasn't that good. And actually it wasn't, there was nothing of significant merit that we had to sort of take care of. And also that the proposal had no other things. There's no overlooking or right of light issues or anything else like that. So, and then he sort of expressed that he would support it, right? And it felt a bit like he was kind of on our side in some ways, which is also a little bit subjective. But it went through, and we didn't change it. We sort of held our ground.
But we did say we would go straight to appeal if they didn't.
Yeah. If
they did refuse it. With this one, we were maybe a bit more, because we were confident.
You loved it that much. You just wanted to see it through, yeah.
Yeah. Or also the fact that we really didn't. I mean, we always believed in the project, but we really didn't think we were doing anything. We were making it better. Like at least we were thinking of this area. That whole block of houses would be better with that as an end site, right? Than it was. So. Well, hopefully they're happy now. I don't think,
No, definitely.
So
this is a bit of a contrast. This is in a large Victorian house in North London. So yeah, as I say, we do Victorian. This one was nice. Again, the working with the client, the collaboration with the client was interesting. And I think that's mainly what we'll talk about because we don't have lots of time to talk about the whole process. But it was we did a basement actually excavation. There was a sort of half basement for a bit of storage. We did a basement excavation here, made a model also of a rear extension. So it was quite a lot of new space added, and the basement was kind of a self-contained flat. But what was nice about this project was the client had very strong views on a kind of colour palette that reminded her of her childhood home. And so that was kind of the main brief from her, really, to take forward, wasn't it? So it was sort of the childhood in the 70s of these murky, various browny yellow tones. And we've worked with tiles on several projects. Really love working with tiles as a very hard-wearing, but also beautiful kind of, they've got beautiful qualities, these handmade tiles that are made to a bespoke mold from a little pottery we worked with in the Cotswolds. So we developed, there were various samples and various colours that we went through. But I think if we show some pictures, it turned out.
Was she a creative as well? Is that why she was keen to stick with the colour palette and stuff?
Not in her profession.
She quite often said to us that she wished she'd been an architect. Like she had this thing in her where I think that's the case of a lot of people who aren't necessarily working in the creative industry, that they and like we see that with lots of our clients, that they would have been good as designers or as as something else in our world. But she it was kind of quite clear that she had this thing in her head, and it was sort of our job to, I guess, mitigate and control it somehow, right? To make sure that these things, like for instance the brown, she really loved brown, and actually, in the beginning we had to sort of get used to the fact that was a good thing. So for instance, I don't like, we always work with these like all fixtures and fittings, and I'm sure someone would have had to kind of specially say just to them to spray brown.
No,
I don't think anyone's ever. I can't imagine lots of people ordering the roller in brown. Right? Like it's one of the.
No, I don't see them very often.
Yeah, in the factory they would have been like, no, seriously, it is brown, and that was kind of, it gave it this, like the next picture. Like we haven't actually sort of ever put these images together on one slide, but it really shows a continuous strategy of the color
from the kitchen to the bathroom to the balustrade to the sort of exterior walls, which were both on the front and the back.
So even so although all the tones are different, even the kitchen to the it's not like it's one color.
Like a family,
it's a family of colors. And this is like it's quite a remarkable handmade 8-meter kitchen, but it's sort of I think this would be one of the projects that would be quite nice in like 10 years to go, because it was slightly sterile in its photos when we took the photograph. It wasn't occupied. But so that's.
Do you guys usually have quite a lot of input on the color schemes that go into your projects and stuff? Because obviously you look at your portfolio and there's always those kind of really pop of bright colors, and there's a bit of a story there.
Quite often we advise our clients to make sure that the interiors can take whatever mess or whatever furniture you want, right? Like it shouldn't be so screamy that that if you want a red sofa, you don't have to think about it. You just have to pick the best fabric colors. It has to complement.
But we definitely we do make those and color decisions and present them to the clients, and we really enjoy that. And kind of take the colors tend to come from either, in this case, from kind of a client having a very strong preference, and then we kind of work out how to make that work, or it can be from inspiration in a painting, or it starts around an object or something like that.
Or it's like the client goes like, I like brown, and then you have to find the brown that is the best brown for this, and that works. But I think it's also quite often we use color in seeing the interior like a landscape, that it can be very useful to color a object, say like a staircase, or not just go full on color everywhere, but that use the color to drag your eye down into an interior and use them as these kind of markers within a landscape, like a tree in I don't want to be all like metaphorical, but like it can really it can draw your eye deep into the space, which can be really helpful occasionally.
I think one of the interesting one of the interesting things for me on that color palette, Johan, was, I am a child of the 70s, and I grew up. I absolutely know exactly where your client is coming from on this one, because that's very much the color palette I grew up with. Except that I would contend that, being a child of the 70s, actually the color palette is kind of from the 50s.
True.
Rather, the brown, the brown was a 70s color. That I can remember, like the oranges and the yellows. Particularly in Australia, obviously, but I actually think there's something sort of almost delightfully 50s about that, with the 70s accents sort of coming in.
It's true.
Well, those were the parents, weren't they, bringing their colours in?
Yeah.
It comes from the game, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's right.
And in some way, I guess it's just a kind of, there's a sort of a feel that, like, Susanna was definitely someone who had it was like the feel of a place that she was trying to describe to us, and there was a few objects from or that painting up there, or it's just something that reminded her of that time. Final project we just want to show you is again about collaboration. It's on site at the moment, so we've not published this, and it's a Victorian sort of 3-story house in Hackney, And this is like just a few images of the sort of point of no return, as we call it. We're halfway sort of through the demolition.
The back of the house.
Yeah, just take the house down. And here it was like the client Leona is a graphic designer, and this is an example of one of her alphabets that she created. And you can sort of see that there's a very significant style here. So we were thinking about how we could utilize that and kind of get her design into the house.
We actually noticed, we noticed that the front of the Victorian house has a kind of fresco.
Oh yeah.
Moulding in a similar design to her work, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was probably it.
A lot of the Victorian houses in Dalston, or around generally, again, that's echoed in something that was built 120 years ago, and then see
just a small detail that you wouldn't notice unless you really looked.
Exactly. So I think that's where we kind of
that's
the two,
true.
wasn't it?
I forget. That's so true. Yeah. And then, as I said before, it's like that was a reference to a shop space we did in East London, where we did this concrete table where there was like 3 different tones of green, and we got them cast and made
displaying
bits,
objects, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so we thought, actually, could we use that as an exterior, and started dividing up the facade of the rear and the extension into these. Okay, your faces are in the way, but I'm going to move you. There you go. So try to sort of divide them up into panels on the facade, and then asked Leona to create patterns within those panels. So these are not the right colors. It's just to reference the shop drawings to say what depth they should be. So
she designed each one.
Yeah, she basically.
So we kind of gave her the dimensions, and then she worked her illustrations into them.
Yeah, and it was really nice because it's an on-site project, right? So it looks like this at the moment, but you can see the panels are going up here on the rear extensions, quite a substantial extension. And then so these are massive doors that are not been put in at this point, but you can see her designs here on this one. So that's like the light catches it really nicely, and then suddenly her works of art kind of are on that facade, which really, it was a nice and, I guess, subtle way of translating directly the client's sort of design ideas into the building. So yeah, that was just to say, it like Staker was more clean cut in terms of it being very direct in its concept, and then actually becoming that. Where here there was a bit more of a journey, a bit like the other project with the colors.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Sorry, we have totally overrun.
No,
that's fine. Okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Cool.
No, they're brilliant projects. And it's nice to see a contrast.
I like the way that you've plugged Leona's work in there too as well, because you sort of, the architecture gives you a sense of place, and then that gives you the sense of person that will, it'll outlive us all, right? So that's really quite beautiful.
That is, I think there's a lot of, like, there are definitely, on that note, there are a couple of things that we really care about: longevity, that we try and design something that will both have design relevance for the future, but also in its material palette is future proof, right? Like, as much as possible within the budget, design something that lasts,
Yeah, don't ever tell us if one of our houses gets sold and someone rips it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's what we would aim for, someone, the next people to also like it, for it to not kind of just be a trend.
Would you take it personally?
Yeah.
There's too much love being poured into these homes.
We hope that the people buying it are sort of as happy as the clients. But there've been a few cases where our clients have sold the property and it seemed to be liked afterwards. We don't know. We don't want to know. No idea. That's it.
Awesome.
Let me just check the Q&As. Chris, have you got any questions, mate?
No, I think I've delivered all my questions. Actually, no, while you're having a look, I'm interested to ask you just quickly about that Broadstairs project that you mentioned right at the start of the presentation, the new build. So how did that client come to you?
We actually knew them from a previous smaller project.
Yeah.
And had worked with someone else in their family. So yeah, kind of word of mouth, sort of knew them, but haven't worked with them properly on a larger project before.
Yeah, so it wasn't sort of a leap of faith.
Well, it kind of was in some ways. We haven't done anything this sort of scale for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's in planning at the moment. So that is to be seen.
Yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
that goes. Yeah.
That's why we haven't
Yeah.
shown anything. We don't want to.
Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Yeah.
We'll have to get you back in a couple of years' time, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where that's going.
So someone's asked, obviously you go about going into the finer details like the fixtures and fittings and things like that. How do you approach, they've asked, how do you approach that, you know, not just looking at the budget, but from a style perspective? It's a very difficult question.
We get to know our clients through the kind of concept stage, and also through spending that time in their house and kind of understanding what it is they like. Yes, and then kind of post planning when we come into detail design, we present them with a kind of package of various fixtures and fittings and that sort of thing. But to be honest, we also have looked through an awful lot of things, for example, sanitary ware, and we have out of that chosen very few things that we tend to recommend to clients.
Yeah.
So we are very picky about what we.
Yeah, the thing.
But those are the things that the client will also like. But
I think that's the thing. There are a lot of objects that we really love, right? So, and then those are the objects that we would kind of bring first, I guess. Usually also the ones that get picked. But it is a kind of a, I guess it is a process of it's the same thing I love of furniture and anything made like that. It's really deep. It's kind of, I don't think we have a great respect for someone who can make an amazing chair as well as someone who can make an amazing house, right? And I think that level is just really nice to see. We can pick these little things that these brilliant designers have done, and we don't have to design it. Quite often it's, you know, it's like it wouldn't make sense for us to design a bookshelf because these guys have already they've done it, right? And it's so much better than what we could make, you know, for that amount of money. So occasionally it's just to sort of pay your respect to some of the great stuff that's already out there.
And kind of coordinate that in the right way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously budget is always a concern, and we try and marry something like a simple, cheap white tile with a small area of beautiful marble terrazzo. And quite often those bits will be small areas, and so in that way we can kind of make it work for the budget. So there are quite utilitarian, but again, they have to be very carefully chosen to not have something, you know, that's slightly off on them. But quite simple utilitarian materials, and then pairing that with something a bit more in the kind of expensive or.
Plus, some of the products have also, I guess, they're kind of timeless in a sense. You want to, for instance, like we were talking about the taps. Like you don't really want to have to change your tap after 10 years, right? And that was designed in the 60s, and it's still one of the best taps ever made, right? And you kind of think, well, then. If it then breaks, you just call them up and it won't be discontinued because it's still a completely relevant piece of design, and you just replace it, right? You just replace the part rather than the whole thing. And I think that's what we like. The things
that's value, isn't it? Longer term value.
Yeah, like the things that you touch and use all the time. We will try and shift the budget, as Margaret was saying. Is like you care a little bit more about spending some of the money on those things, so that you sustain this idea of longevity in those objects.
I suppose it's like what you were explaining at the very beginning, where you try to create these kind of timeless moments that will go beyond the lifetime of the house inside. You kind of want that to reflect in everything that is permanent within that house, no? Yeah. And that comes with all those fixtures and fittings.
Yeah, and if you have, I mean, lots of the time it can also be quite like it can sound a bit arrogant as a conversation, because it's very much about what you can afford, right? But like, if you can afford it, then buy the dining chair that you want the rest of your life and that you want your kids to have, right? And at the same time, that I think goes for some of the things in the interior as well. Like you want to make sure that door handle just functions for the next 200 years.
And the kitchen, you can't do a kitchen for 10 years. You know, that's not a sustainable way.
No.
Both in money and, you know, and material sustainability, carbon and effort. All of those things. Like, it needs to be. Yeah, it needs to be.
Then it's better to sort of scale down something else in order to make sure that, you know, phase it or do something else, like or wait.
Yeah. Now I've got another question from Sinead. She's asking, you know, in relation to your mid-century houses that you've done, Are you always looking to insulate and retrofit for low energy use for those buildings? And if so, what have you found works really well?
I mean, actually, mid-century houses are really, really good for this because they are relatively easy to shell and create this like warm. Either it's a cavity walls that can be insulated, or either inside or outside, and ceiling stuff. But quite often it's also paneled walls that are actually really easy to insulate. So
they're sort of not brick walls. Quite often they're quite often timber faced walls, which you can insulate from the inside. From the outside, we haven't managed to do any from the outside.
Clockhouse had
true.
Face insulation,
true.
right?
We have done some behind tiles, but generally it has to be internal insulation. We're looking at kind of wood fibre, using wood fibre insulation. You can get relatively thin panels. You just have to watch that it's breathable and that you're not kind of trapping moisture inside and that sort of thing.
But it's definitely one of the first things we want to add to the house is a very warm envelope. Also, pretty much never done a house where we haven't changed all the windows to become
double glazed windows. The roof tends to be pretty straightforward to insulate between the joists. And floor depends. I mean, if we're extending, obviously, or converting a garage, you take out the concrete slab and insulate underneath there. But there's also systems where you can just insulate underneath floorboards between the joists and that sort of thing. So it's obviously really important and just getting more and more. So
do you feel like people's attitudes towards that are changing quite a lot in your lifetime? Because obviously early on, I can imagine spending quite a bit of money on insulation and things like that was a difficult conversation to have.
Or it would slip off. It would be the thing that slipped off.
Quietly disregarded.
I mean, if anything, the energy cost at the moment should hopefully make people think a little bit more carefully about that. It's just not. I mean,
and us. I mean, it's our job to
But
make sure that happens.
And secondly, also, it's just really nice to have a kind of a controlled interior, because it's not just winter, right? It's also insulating against the heat in the summer. Quite often you try, I mean, it doesn't work quite as well, but you try and really insulate the ceiling to make the solar gain slightly less inside the bedrooms, for instance, on the top floor. But it works both ways, right? Like you can keep hot and cold water in a thermal flask, right? It's the same thing for a house. You got to do that. I think it's one of the first things to do. Yeah.
Can I ask a technical question on that score that I'm almost embarrassed that I don't know the answer to? But in a large project, you talk about like breathability and condensation and things like that. In a large project, you'd have an M&E consultant to assist you with that. Is that part of your skill set that you're working on residential projects? Do you get an M&E person in, or do you just go, no, actually, we know how this works and all the product spec and everything like that?
It depends on the scale, really. Yeah, we would for a larger project, definitely.
But also for a larger residential.
Yeah.
Quite often, actually, it's also dealing with really trustworthy building control people. Like, it's actually quite nice to have a conversation with
we tend to work with independent building inspectors
and
they can be very helpful.
And it's quite nice to set up that relationship very early on, so you have a concept design and then you actually sign them on straight after that to have really good conversation about thermal breaks and walls and and venting and all that stuff, because they are really knowledgeable. They can be really helpful. We have a really good idea about stuff, but they can be really helpful when it's a project that doesn't need an M&E kind of consultant directly on it. So I would say relationship with it seems to be, people always think that the building control is just there to sort of sign off things, but they have really knowledgeable about building stuff, right? And they like in structural engineers should be signed on very early, we think, and guide the project, because they're incredibly helpful, not just to check whether you're doing things right. They're very good, So that would be our advice.
But we haven't got to sort of reach passive house level. So
no,
we're not. Some on the smaller residential, there's enough ventilation through trickle vents and windows and that sort of thing. Generally, it's not a massive issue. But it's definitely something to consult on if there is a lot going in.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap then, guys. If anyone's got any other questions, doesn't look like it.
No. Great.
All good.
Yeah, all good. Well, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
That was fantastic.
Well, thanks
Yeah.
so much for having
And
us.
we look forward to seeing you new projects coming through.
Us too.
Yeah.
You can't wait. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We've got 2 more coming up over the next week. We're cramming them in. The next one tomorrow we've got with Constructive & Co, who are some makers out of East London, who are absolutely lovely guys, and looking forward to chatting to those. And we're speaking to the lovely Studio Hagen Hall next week, talking about their California style apartment, which again I'm really looking forward to, and I know Chris is as well, one of his fan favorites.
Child of the 70s.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, if you're not already signed up to those, feel free to visit our website at wedesignhomes.co.uk, get yourself signed up, and we'll see you there. If you don't get a chance to see it, we'll be posting up this video and other videos onto our YouTube channel. So thanks very much and have a good evening.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Thanks guys, take care.
Bye.
See ya.